Today's lecture is chapter 46, Animal Reproduction. As we start this lecture, what are different ways do animals reproduce? There's many different ways and many different relationships when it comes to animals. Animal reproduction takes many forms. Some organisms reproduce with even at the form of sex, so like asexually and things like that, or some species having both male and female organs to help them reproduce without needing a significant partner or fertilization with a male. And then even some organisms can change their sex over a period of time due to environmental factors within an environment. Now discussing reproduction, there's asexual and sexual reproduction that happens in the animal kingdom. Now, sexual reproduction is when it's recreated from offspring from the fusion of haploid cell gametes, a male sperm, and a female egg, forming a diploid zygote, which is needing a male or a female to produce. It's usually as two partners, where it's known as sexual reproduction. Though when you're talking about asexual reproduction, that's self-reproduction, which is creating the offspring without the fusion of eggs, so it's going to be a duplicate of itself. Within these processes, more genetic variation is going to be appeared in sexual reproduction due to having genes from both the mother and the father, though asexual is not going to have much genetic variation or diversity due to just being copies of the parent cell. Now I want to talk about some mechanisms of asexual reproduction. There's some different types of forms, such as budding, which is the simplest form of reproduction, which is found among invertebrates, which is usually just reproducing by fission and separating from a parent into two or more individual cells about the same size. So that's going to be the process of reproducing itself into copies of itself and just splitting off from itself. And there's fragmentation, which is the breaking of body parts or other pieces of its anatomy, which also lead to developing into full adults, or such as accompanied by regeneration or regrowth of body parts. So like this could be when you're talking about growing into another full adult, that's like taking pieces off trees to grow into another tree, or pieces of coral or things like that that break off and get planted somewhere, or such as plants and seeds that grow into another full adults. Now, regrowth of body parts are usually going to be seen in lizards and things that loses tails, so that's where regeneration is accompanied by fragmentation, but not satirically saying they grow into adults when they lose a limb, that limb that is, they just regrow the limb they lost. And there's parthenogenesis, which is the development of a new individual from an unfertilized egg, so it doesn't need sperm or anything like that. It's just the asexual reproduction of the female's egg without needing being fertilized. Now talking about variations and patterns of sexual reproduction, we're going to talk a lot of things within this when it's dealing with when one needs two partners. So within that, usually animals have trouble finding, a partner for reproduction. So within that, there's relationships where one will mate with only one other mate for the rest of its life. Such as humans, we only find usually one mate to mate with for offspring and things and have significant relationships. Though animals can also have ones where they have many different partners, not just one, or a female will go back to the male, but the male is also reproducing with other groups of the herd or things like that. So that kind of makes it challenging in a way when it comes to what kind of relationships animals have sexually when they're finding a partner. Then there's another pattern, which is hermaphroditism, which is everyone has both male and female reproduction systems. Though two individuals can mate under this system, but usually you will see these being self-fertilized of their eggs, so they don't need another mate to produce a fertilized egg in this type. But it is not common to see this. Within that, there's also some species can change their gender over time due to the environmental population between male and females within this. It's another interesting sexual reproduction factor due to the mechanisms of sexual reproduction. Now, there's many reproductive cycles within reproduction. Most animals are going to exhibit reproductive cycles that are related to changing seasons, and then some are going to deal with hormones and environmental cues, which I was talking about changing seasons. Because usually, some people are going to mate in the fall, and then their offspring will be born in the spring. So that plays in a factor as like you do not want to have offspring born in the winter because that results into lower survival rates and things like that. So mating seasons are usually before or after seasons that can harm the survival rate of the offspring, depending on how long their incubation periods or gestation periods of producing offspring. So within that, there's also ovulation, which is a release of mature eggs at the midpoint of a female cycle. That's a hormonal thing. That's usually when a female can be the most easiest being fertilized or ready for breeding and things like that. So that's a hormonal cue for their mating season or mating cycle. As I was talking about environmental cues earlier, seasonal temperature is the most important, like I was saying, due to reproduction and the success of that. So some organisms can reproduce sexually and asexually depending on their conditions within that, because the mechanisms and anatomy due to either having both male female parts, but relating on their mating seasons is all relating on the success of the offspring. Now moving to reproduction, which is an evolutionary enigma. Within this, sexual females will have half as many daughters as asexual females, which is part of the twofold cost theory of sexual reproduction. Which even despite this, is just like you would think asexual females will probably produce more due to not needing mates and things like that, more than half. But it does make sense that sexual females do have less than asexual. But you would think, asexual females will produce more, but just due to the twofold system cost of sexual reproduction is how it ends up being half. Despite almost all like eukaryotic species reproduce sexually when it comes to reproduction. And sexual reproduction may enhance reproductive success of parents when environment factors change relatively rapidly. So that's like disruptions, environments, or things like that. Some things that play into factors that either give a huge burst, a quick burst of increased reproduction levels in a population, or decrease levels of reproduction in a population in an environment. Doing a quick overview on this, I was talking about the twofold earlier. This is going to be a reproduction handicap, kind of relates to that. So in sexual reproduction, as I was saying, you can more offspring are produced because it's just copies. So first generation is going to be producing 2 in the second generation, so on to the 3 producing 4, and then fourth generation producing 8. But with sexual reproduction, the male needs a female, so every time there's only one, usually offspring produced. So that's going to be at least cutting that in half, causing a handicap where sexual reproduction is a little bit slower. Now, fertilization depends on mechanisms that bring together sperm and eggs of the same species, which this is the fertilization is the union of an egg and sperm, which can be external or internal. Usually, when two male and female mates come together, that's how this happens. Which in external fertilization, eggs are shed by the female and are fertilized by sperm in the external environment. So within that, you'll see external fertilization is like eggs are spread, the male will, sperminate them in a way, such as fish is a good example of that. Then moving on to, internal fertilization, that's when there's an adaptation that enables sperm to reach an egg despite in a dry environment or anything. So that's just like some species have physiology things that help them collect sperm and it will develop inside instead of being externally factors. So moving on to mating animals, make use of pheromones, which is another mechanism or chemicals released by one organism that influence the physiology behaviors of individuals of the same species. So these pheromones kind of either attract animals that come breeding, things like that. So that's a very interesting chemical factor mechanism because that is in every day to promote breeding and things like that. Now moving on to ensuring the survival of an offspring, which typically animals that fertilize an egg internally produce fewer gametes than species with external fertilization, but have a higher fraction of their, zygotes, the offspring, to survive because they develop their young over a period of time and not external factors having an affect their external reproduction processes. So usually, like humans, the baby develops in size and you're born, it's born within coming out of the female, and it's more protected than such as an egg that had to survive survival conditions that can affect it compared to the internal support when it comes to that. Now, better zygote survival is due to part of fact is, like I was saying, fertilized eggs are not sheltered away from predators and things like that. It's hard to, which internal has a better benefit because of the mechanisms and protection by embryos and parental care of the young and things like that is being carried around the parent instead of being just left out in the open where something can attack it. Gamete production and delivery. That's going to be talking about sexual reproduction. When males produce gametes from precursor cells, that's going to be a male gamete and a female gamete, which is sperm or egg. Most of these species have gonads and organs that produce these specifically on their gender. Some organisms don't have gonads but have gametes in the form of different tissues and different structures, though the set of sexual glands and tubercles that help nourish these gametes and help develop embryos at a better success have structures. So reproduction structures are going to play a big part of this. But there's interesting facts like insects have separate sexes and more complex reproduction systems, like such as a fly or some things like that. And a female will have a spermaca, which collects the sperm, stores it, and will fertilize themselves over time. Now talking about the human male reproductive anatomy. So every organism has a different type of reproduction structures and things like that. But the male is going to have the most distinct, or human male is going to have the most distinct. So like it's going to have external reproductive organs that are such as the scrotum and the penis. Though these internal organs are also including the gonads, which produce their sperm, and hormones that help them have growth and things like that within that. Though there's also accessory glands that secrete products to help sperm travel throughout the accessory structures and things such as the ducts to carry it out and for ejaculation and things like that. As you can see here on the pictures on the side, it gives you kind of a great overview of all the little structures that are included in the male reproductive system, such as their, big structures and accessory glands and things like that, such as the scrotum, the urethra, the prostate, and the testes, the epidermis, and the vas dermis, and the prostate gland and things like that. So this just gives a great overview of what are the male external reproduction systems. Continuing male reproduction anatomy, we're going to be talking about male gonads and or they're called testes are coiled tubes around and connective tissue which sperm form within these and the seminiferous tubes and these seminary to infernus tubes of the testes is how the sperm passes through the coiled ducts of the epidermis, which goes out during ejaculation of sperm propelled through the muscular vas deferens in the ejaculatory ducts and then exit the penis through the urethra. So these are tubes from the gonads, the testes, going out and back through the penis during these processes. Though there's also another accessory gland called the prostate gland, which secretes its products directly into the urethra through severity small ducts such as urine and things like that. Usually humans are composed of 3 cylinders of texture of on the penis, which is spongy erectile tissues, which cause erections and things like that and help with the success of reproduction. Moving to human female reproductive anatomy, we're going to be talking about a lot of external structures within this, such as a clitoris and 2 sets of labia. The internal organs here of the gonads are going to be usually gametes contain the embryo and the fetus, which in this female gonads are ovaries in the flank of the uterus and the abdominal cavity, which each ovary contains follicles, which consist a developed egg and an oocyte, which is surrounded by supported cells, which these are things that are just going to help be the egg before being fertilized. Continuing female reproductive structures, you're also going to be talking about the egg cells that travel through the ovary and the uterus via oviduct and fallopian tubes. Now, the cecilia and the ovia conveys the egg into the uterus, which also is known as the womb when it's fertilized and everything, the embryo grows. Now, the external structures we're going to talk about here is the vagina, which is a muscular elastic chamber that is responsible for sperm being entered and serves as the birth canal. So this is going to be a reproduction structure that's used when a male and a female come together, where the penis inserts and things like that. The vaginal, is open from the outside to the vulva, which consists of the labia majora, labia minora, and the hymen and the clitoris, which are external structures for reproduction processes. Now, an accessory gland to this is the mammary glands, which is not a part of the reproduction system, play an important part though, which is used for like producing milk and for the young and things like that is what the mammary glands are. Now here's a quick photo of the anatomy of the female. before we end the lecture here, I just wanted to add this in so you get an idea of what these structures are going to look. Here's what it's going to look from the side of the opening going into the oviducts, the over uterus, and things like that, how the process works. And here's an overview part, what usually this reproductive system kind of looks like: the vagina, this cervix, the uterus, the oviducts, and the ovaries contained with the follicles and everything like that. But thank you for listening to this lecture today.